My name is Joseph Marvin, also known as Baby Doe, or in the town of Riverdale, Baby Dale, and I'm 22 years old. When I was 5 years old, I learned that I was adopted, but it wasn't until about 10 years later I realized there was a lot more to the story. My story actually started here in Riverdale, Nebraska, on these steps to my right. It was September 6, 1996. 3 boys were walking to school to catch a bus to Kearney, and they heard crying at the top of these steps, and they came over to see what was the noise. And when they got here, they thought it was actually a baby doll, but they realized that it was actually a real baby. I was only hours old when I was placed there, and I was suffering from hypothermia. After they found me, they ran over across the street to get some school teachers at the nearby school, and they told them that they found a baby. But of course, all 3 boys were actually troublemakers, so the teachers didn't believe them at first. And when they realized how frightened and panicked they were about the whole situation, they believed them finally after about 5 minutes and came over and found me for a second time, and then immediately called 911, and an ambulance from the Good Samaritan Hospital in Kearney came and picked me up. But surprisingly enough, I didn't learn my life story until my senior year of college at 22. But the way I came across the story was more of a miracle than the actual story itself. About 2 months ago, I was going through a really rough time and had one of those days where the first thing you did wrong was you woke up, and I didn't really know what to do, so the following day I went and I bought a Bible. I started reading that, and I started reading the daily devotional, and shortly after I started reading that, all these things just started kind of unfolding before my eyes. I started working at a coffee shop in Kearney, and I made a joke about me being dropped off on the steps of the church in Riverdale, Nebraska, and that one joke is kind of why I'm here right now. I told my coworker that, and he knew a lot about the actual story itself, a lot more than I knew. And when we were talking about it, I asked him how he knew all these details, and he said that he was taking a class at UNK, an English class, and he was also working for the Kearney Hub at the same time during when he found out this story. And his English professor and his boss at the Kearney Hub were the very first 2 authors that covered the story about me when I got dropped off on that day in 1996. And he was very, very intrigued with the story, and he asked if he could borrow the file that had every single story written about me, about when I was a baby. And my life was documented for about the first year and a half on the front pages of the Kearney Hub. And he had all these files for 3 years sitting in his house. And it was the same week that I bought my Bible, that was the same week that he stumbled into this file sitting on top of his stuff. And when he looked at it, he said I should probably take it home or take it back to the Kearney Hub, but I'm not going to, since I left there 3 years ago. It'd be weird at this point. And he just decided to keep it. So 3 weeks later, when I made that joke at work, he was really surprised that I was that baby, and that I'd been working with him, and he knew about my story. And that night he went home and he Facebook checked me to make sure I wasn't lying to him when I told him that that's who I was. And he sent me a message at about 1:30 in the morning, and it said, hey man, I've had this file for 3 years. I didn't want to tell you at work to creep you out or anything, but it's got every single article written about you if you'd like to see it. The next day he came into work and he gave me the file that had all the articles, and I started reading them, and towards the end of the articles there was a picture of the 3 boys that found me, and I was curious to see if I could find one of them on Facebook. I found a couple of people that I thought might be, but I wasn't entirely sure, because when you're trying to add 22 years to a 12-year-old's face, it's kind of hard. And I got one of them on the very first try. It was actually the only message I sent out to any of the 3 boys. And I just said, "Hey, did you find a baby 22 years ago? Are you this guy?" And I sent a picture of that article to him. And I waited. The following day, I came here to the church at Riverdale, and I just wanted to talk to the pastor to see if he knew anything about the story. And surprisingly enough, the pastor that was here 22 years ago still is here. And to his shock and my shock, we got to meet each other for the very first time. And that night, or that day when I met him on that Sunday, he took me to his house and gave me a book that the Riverdale Church had made about 5 years ago. And on the center page, they have a story written about me being dropped off here, and they called it Our Church Miracle. And it had a couple of articles on the pages in the book. And what was really weird to me in that book, on that page, was the very top picture of the newspaper article clipping was the same one that my adoptive parents had. And it was from March of 1997. And I'd never seen any of the other articles from my adoptive parents because they lost them, but that was the one article that they had. And underneath on this book is the front page of the very first one that was written about me, and that was the one that Tyler sent me on Facebook. And it was just the fact that the picture that he took and then the one that my parents had were on the same page. I was just like, okay, God's definitely playing a huge role in this. And that's when my faith became a lot stronger, and I started growing closer to God at the same time. And 2 days later, I'm sitting at home and I'm doing homework, and it's about 11:30 at night, and I finally get a message on Facebook from the guy that I had reached out to, and all he said was, "What is your number?" And to me that was like confirmation, because it was him, it had to be him. But the phone call said otherwise, because he was so angry with me and he was interrogating me for like 5 minutes, asking me like how I found him on Facebook, if I was messing with him, and all these things that like completely blew my mind. And he asked me to explain myself, and I told him the story of how I found the picture of him in this article. And he finally confirmed that it was him. He was the guy that found me with 2 of his friends. And the reason he said he was so mad was because he said, 5 days ago I had a dream I talked to you on the phone. And to me, to hear that, it was like the weirdest thing in the world. But at the same time, the way everything unfolded, it wasn't really that weird. It was starting to become normal. And we talked, and we ended up meeting the next day, and the following day I met with the very first 2 reporters that covered the story about me being dropped off here. We sat down over coffee, and I told them how I found them, and I told them the story about Tyler, since that was kind of like the reason this all started with him taking that class and working for the Hub. And that was kind of the connecting point for all of us. And they asked if they could do a story about it, and they did. They wrote a story, and I was on the front page of the Kearney Hub. And as to date, the story's been read over 15,000 times on the Kearney Hub's website. The story's made it to the Omaha World Herald, the Independent in Grand Island. It's went to almost every newspaper in Nebraska. It's made its way down to Kansas, South Dakota, Iowa, and it even made it to Waco, Texas a few weeks ago. The Associated Press was able to get a hold of this story, and it went everywhere. And those are just the places I know about. When we did the article for the Kearney Hub, they titled it "Baby Doe Searching for His Birth Mother." And that's what people only saw in the story, was me trying to find my birth parents. But the truth is, everything happened so quickly. From me finding all the articles from Tyler and getting those from him, to meeting the Kearney Hub reporters, that story all happened within 2 weeks. And and I had so much thrown at me. I didn't know what to do, and I wasn't ever actually looking for my birth parents. And that's what everyone tried to make it out to be, but the fact of the matter was, I didn't find them. I found something bigger, and that was that I found God again.